the Googleverse. Our team manages all of our Google built, owned, and operated event spaces on our global campuses. So we have about, oh gosh, more than 600 venues, and they range from like learning and development spaces all the way up to like world-class event centers. So we have a design arm, we have an ops arm, and we have a strategic arm, which is my program. And so my job is to really put forth a point of view around strategy, how we should be showing up as a service organization for Google in the product areas. And in 2021, I was really stumped because there was a lot we didn't know. And that is where Experience Institute came into play. We decided to phone a lot of industry friends and build a community around answering some of these big questions that, quite frankly, we just could not answer on our own. And some of the first insights we got out of the exploration with that community were around new rules of engagement and new social norms. And that led us on a journey down a path to really trying to better understand how to design for inclusion and belonging.
Wait, I want to pause you there because there's a lot to unpack here. So when you said there was a lot of questioning about how do we meet and how do we evolve with what's been happening in the industry, can you give a little more clarity and example? Like, was this an idea that you proposed? And if so, how did you phrase it in terms of getting buy-in from Google?
Yeah, so it was definitely a journey. Where we started was we all agreed, there was consensus that we needed to better understand how people had changed as a result of the pandemic and who they were showing up as, right, in this very new context and paradigm. And so we started exploring preferences systems, just trying to figure out how we best create that shared understanding between designer and audience. And that gave us some just really interesting insights on how expectations had evolved. People aren't willing to tolerate as much as they once were. They expect some agency, some autonomy. They expect to be asked what they need. And so that's really the next step on that journey, that road trip, was inclusion. So, okay, now that we know these things, how do we best design, consider, reflect what we know to be true about our audience? And we identified a gap with neuroinclusion. And honestly, from a stakeholder perspective, like, no one could argue that it was a gap. We had no good education and enablement specifically for event professionals and event leaders to speak the language of neurodiversity and to understand the different types of brains that we were designing for. So we decided to build it, and that's the new project, which we launched this morning. So I'm very excited.
It's NEU, short for neurodiversity.
Yeah.
Neuroinclusion.
Yeah.
So can we talk a little bit about that? Because neurodiversity, neuroinclusion has been a buzzword in, at least in the events and meetings industry, relatively recently. I feel like there's been a lot written about it, but not necessarily a lot done about it in terms of bringing it into practice. So can you share a little bit about what does that mean? What is an example for neurodiversity? I mean, we in ELI, so we have a course on DEI strategy, diversity, equity, inclusion. We just launched today our course on event accessibility, which is another facet of that. And neurodiversity, it sort of feels like it's in this category that's not visible. Somebody's not walking around with a crutch or a patch on their eye, or they're out in a wheelchair. They're not with a cane. And so it's not easily identifiable. So it's an internalized, I don't know if disability is the right word, but it's an internalized trait that we're addressing. So what would be some examples of neurodiverse attendees in terms of how they manifest themselves?
Yeah, so neurodiversity is actually all of us. So neurodiversity is just a form of human diversity, and it's just our brains, right? So it is a hidden form of diversity, sometimes a hidden form of disability. Some neurodivergent people consider themselves disabled, some do not. But neurodiversity is neurotypical people and neurodivergent people. And neurodivergent is defined as cognitive or neurofunctioning that is different from typical, right? That could be autism, ADHD, OCD, Tourette syndrome, sensory processing differences, traumatic brain injury. There's that's just to name a few. There's a lot of ways that neurodivergence can manifest, but more than 20% of the global population has some form of neurodivergence, and
Could you repeat that percentage?
more than 20%.
Really?
Yeah. So they're estimating about 1 in 5. The more studies we dig into in this work, the more we're learning that that's actually a very conservative estimate, because formal diagnosis is a privilege. It can sometimes be very cost prohibitive. In
Right.
certain places, wait lists are years long, right? People have to take off work to get evaluated. So there are a lot of people walking around, probably here at IMEX, who are undiagnosed but have some sort of neurodivergence.
So we talked, just as an example of an area of connection. I read you posted on LinkedIn about your son's somewhat recent diagnosis of autism. And I shared about my nephew who had a similar diagnosis about 3 or 4 years ago. And we talked a little bit about that and how, just seeing firsthand how they process their environments very differently. So my nephew, as an example, if we sing happy birthday, it's extremely painful for him. I can't explain why, I just know that it is. And like he would be completely overwhelmed here, and it would wear him out. Just the processing power in his brain to absorb everything would be very overwhelming, and he'd probably need some downtime afterwards. So can you share a little bit about how, whether it's your personal experience or not, how an attendee that might have one of these neurological impairments, how would an event like this impact them? Or would they just not even show up because they know what it's going to be like? Like, are we missing out on a lot as opposed to just the people who are here and struggling?
Yeah, we're missing out for sure. There are a lot of, we've talked to a lot of neurodivergent people as a part of this project who said, like, I won't even go because I know there's not going to be safe space for me, and I'm going to be overscheduled, and I'm not going to be accommodated. I certainly could never bring Otis into this environment. He would be completely overwhelmed. We would have a meltdown. It would be a bad day for him. It takes our family sometimes weeks of planning and preparation. We literally rehearse to travel with him. So yeah, there's a lot of neurodivergent people who aren't willing to put themselves through that because they have to self-accommodate, and there's not even always really good opportunities for that. Another, person who consulted on the project shared that, and she's an incredible speaker. So she goes to like Cannes Lions and speaks, and sometimes it takes her weeks to recover because she's just so energy depleted and so overwhelmed. Yeah, it's rough. It's
so
rough.
This is the equivalent, and we're just picking one type now. This is the equivalent of, at the end of the day, I'm wearing sneakers, but they're probably more comfortable than your shoes. We're gonna be done at the end of the day. We're gonna sit down and be like, oh my God, my feet are killing me. Yeah. So someone with a neurodiverse trait would feel like that in their brain to some extent, right? That the brain would just be killing them from processing everything. And I'm probably like butchering the diagnosis. I'm trying to frame it in a way that the broader audience can understand what's going on with this.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know how you feel, but like I don't have the endurance that I once did for these things. I'm like rusty. I'm very like.
Well, I'm a little older than you, so I just had my like 4th cup of coffee. So yeah.
I'm very out of practice.
Yeah.
So like I've been overwhelmed all day. But Ellie, one of our other consultants, she talks about things being energy expensive. And
I like that term.
Neurodivergent person has way less energy to spend than you or I as neurotypical people. And so they really have to ration the energy that they put into things. And that's why they need quiet spaces and resilient spaces. And that's why they need to be able to step away anytime that they need to, right? That's why that they potentially need sound filtering headphones. Like any stimuli could potentially rob them of the energy that they have to spend. And so they have to be really protective and careful with it. I loved that. I love that term because it helped me really map to the challenge of that, right?
What would be some examples of ways that meeting and event organizers could design experiences to be more accommodating to neurodiverse individuals? I mean, as an example, at the other end of the floor, the Inspiration Hub, there are sessions where it's almost like a silent disco. You've got headsets on, and I don't know if you experience this, but I presented to an audience like that years ago, and it takes some getting used to as a speaker. But with something as simple as, offering over-the-ear headsets available for individuals who might need them, what are some examples that we could do as event organizers to be more accommodating and be more mindful?
Yeah, so I think it starts with accepting the fact that we have a lot of neurodivergent people at our events. We always have, and we need to start seeing them and asking them what they need. At the New Project website, so it's just thenewproject.com if anyone wants to go check it out. We have a lot of practical tips, but I think it starts with asking and listening. There's a lot we don't know because neurodivergent people have been protecting and self-advocating and accommodating for such a long time. We have a lot to learn from them and those communities. But some simple things, it's just like making a call for neurodivergent accommodations in registration comms. Like we talk about accessibility, but we need to explicitly call out, like, we were trying to make this event, neurodiversity friendly. And we want to understand if sound filtering headphones or having, like fidgets or, quiet spaces would be helpful to you so that we can design against that. Quiet spaces are one of the most meaningful ways because people need to take a break if they're having sensory processing overload.
Can we jump into that for a second?
Yeah.
Because in most events, and this is probably true of IMEX, I've passed quiet zones, like a relaxing zone, and it's sort of built, I don't think, for neurodiversity. It comes in under the umbrella of wellness and mental well-being, could double up for both, but typically it's like outside the show floor, down a hallway. Just taking this example, because a trade show is about as frenetic of an environment. I can't think of a more stimulating environment other than like a rock concert with a laser show. But would it make more sense for the designers to say, you know what, we're going to put a couple of these sort of quiet spaces or cocooned rooms scattered in the floor?
Heck
like,
yes.
like, let's just make it so they don't have to go out of the show, go somewhere else to calm down. What if like every aisle had, or every other aisle had a quiet space or calm space, and people could take advantage of that when they feel overloaded.
Yeah, making those easy to get to and readily available would be huge. Absolutely would be huge. We also are talking about, so culture conventions and the gaming communities are doing a lot more, and they're doing a lot better at this than corporate events right now. And some of the larger culture conventions also have liminal spaces. So it's like space between space, right? That you can sit on a beanbag and like put in headphones and look at your phone, or maybe you even review content from earlier in the day because you were so overwhelmed. You didn't retain any of that, right? But there are options. It's not necessarily a fully privatized quiet space, but it is a place to check out and renew and restore. That is like amongst everyone else. So no neurodivergent experience is the same. And, there are neurodivergent extroverts. There are people that maybe don't want to go into a fully quiet space, but would really love an opportunity to just sit and restore for a minute. So I think there's a lot of things we can play around with.
It's funny because I think this dovetails to a lot of other areas. I do a class on proving the value of your event. And one of the facets of that is not just providing insight and content and connections, but helping create a roadmap for the participant to digest it, think about how they can apply it to their jobs and their business and their events when they get back, and really have some time for it to sink in. Because otherwise you get bombarded with, eureka moments and ideas and connections. You get back to the office and you have 3 days of built up email waiting for you. You get swept back into the river of activity. And a lot of those great ideas just sit in the box. It probably would be good on multiple fronts to have, I've called these reflection zones or reflection teams that are less about intake and more about processing and applying. And at the same time, those would be good places for neurodiverse individuals to kind of calm down and get away from the chaos. It would provide some mental health benefits, and it would be a place of contemplative reflection on how to take what they've learned and absorb and apply it. So I think that kind of simple example could have multiple dividends in different ways in our industry, don't you think?
I would absolutely benefit from that. I think, the pandemic, it was one way of living and one way of working for 2 years, and now we're back, and the world is fully turned on again, and we're expected to bounce from thing to thing with little to no time in between to transition and process and digest and like get ourselves into the next mental space, and we could all benefit from that. And I think that's such a powerful example of like the curb cut effect. Curb cuts being something that were, very much created for.
Let's just pause just for people who are younger, may not know what curb cuts are.
Yeah.
Can we just explain what that is?
Yeah. So curb cuts are like the little cutouts in the sidewalk that essentially were invented for people with mobility
This was
devices.
a big outcome of the Americans with Disabilities Act, right?
Yep. But like, who hasn't used a curb cut with a rolling suitcase or a baby stroller?
Yeah.
Exactly. So we all benefited from that accommodation and that way of holding space for a disabled community. With neuro inclusion, there are limitless opportunities for curb cut. It helps introverts. It helps people who may just have a certain sensory processing difference. It helps, people who just are having a hard time getting back into the swing of things now that the world is turning again. So I think it's just one of the most impactful things we can do.
All right. On another note, since I live in the world of education and professional development, where do you think are some of the biggest skill gaps, I guess, for event professionals? What are the opportunities from a training and mentoring vantage point that we should be thinking more of? I mean, we're on top of this all the time, but sometimes we're too in it. So I do ask a lot of people, where do you see gaps in terms of what would benefit them versus what they currently possess?
Yeah,
skill-wise.
This is such a good question. I was actually talking to another event leader, Miguel from Skiff Meetings on Sunday. We were talking about like roles in our industry of the future, and I think community manager is something that is going to become such an important part of what we do. I think audience advocate could also be a brand new role in our industry. So instead of like mapping to our own outcomes, it's a team totally dedicated to making sure that the people who are coming are getting what they need and what they value. I think honestly, skill gap, things have changed so dramatically. And I think we're still very much leaning into the historical ways that we knew, the historical ways that we've done things, right? And what worked in 2019. And I think we have to let go of that ego a little bit and really ask, like, what do you need now? I think the person that comes along and figures out that mechanism that helps designers understand who's coming and what they expect, like once we optimize for that, that's going to be a total game changer.
Do you find that, because I did a session yesterday on going from order taker to trusted advisor, proving your value with the C-suite. That's something I've been advocating for a long time, but I feel that with the last couple of years, it's even more important. Do you notice that is still an area where a lot of event professionals can improve on, is not just doing the work, but helping to understand why we're doing this event, how the business works of the host organization, what their goals are, how does this event advance those goals, and how do we measure success? And not even necessarily being able to calculate that, although we're teaching that now in our new event measurement course, but just having that conversation with the client. Okay, I understand you want to do this event. What does success look like? Why are we doing this? What is the personas of the attendees, and how will we know if we're successful? I feel like, as simple as that sounds, that's still a very intimidating place for a lot of event organizers to go.
Right.
Do you see that at all? Do you see us making progress in that area?
Because sometimes what you hear or what you learn conflicts with the ways that you've traditionally done things, and that's friction. That makes our jobs harder sometimes. But if I've learned anything from these communities that we've built around Experience Institute and the new project, is that when you listen and observe and then respond, it actually makes our jobs a heck of a lot easier. It is less of a lift if we're getting design right from the outcome. I talk about it as like preventative medicine as opposed to treating a disease once it's already there. Right. If you're waiting until a post-event survey to understand what you did right or wrong, like you've already broken that trust contract with your audience, right? So I really think it's so important to listen and observe and then respond. And you may not get it right the first time or the second time, but like people appreciate that. They become more engaged when they see you trying to consider and reflect and represent them. I really believe that, and we're seeing it. Proof of concept with the work that we're doing.
Perfect. And then on the horizon, in terms of from meetings and events, from what you're seeing at Google and the people you're talking to, where do you see activity heading? Are we as busy looking forward as we were 6 months ago? Have things started to cool? A lot of what we're seeing in the news is a lot of tech companies in particular are starting to cut back a little bit on travel. They're maybe cutting back a little bit on some in-person event activity. What are you seeing just anecdotally?
Yeah. So I mean, I can only share what we're experiencing with my team, but we have had more events in the first half of 2022 than we did in the entire year of 2021. And that trend continues right into the second half of the year. I do think that, impending doomsday economic recession will have it will happen, whatever happens with that. But no, I mean, events are back. Like, I don't see it slowing down. I think we may shift and evolve programmatically around what we're offering. I don't know that we'll ever go back to like 30,000 person events. I mean, this is a pretty big one, so maybe I'm wrong, but I really don't see it slowing down. People want to be together, and we need to be. We solve big problems when we're together, so it's important.
I agree. We definitely need to be together. I'll add that I think we need to be together thoughtfully, and I think event organizers need to be careful of just taking the playbook from last year's event off the shelf and changing the dates and locations and running the same play. I think things are evolving so much that, if we are intentional with what we want to accomplish with these events, we can have a clear purpose, a clearly measurable outcome. I completely think that that's going to continue to do really well.
Yeah.
I think the events that are struggling are the ones that never really had a clear value proposition. They just, people kept coming because we probably should be there, but we don't really know why. We can't measure it, but everyone else is there. A lot of those are the events that are suffering, but the events that have a really good design that really meets the needs of the target audience, I think those, you're right, are just going to continue to do what? And they're going to do better because people are going to be very selective. I do think people are going to be more selective with where they spend their time. And I think if they're intentional about it, they're going to make sure they go to the events that are going to address their needs in a thoughtful way. And if you're not doing that, I think you're at a significant risk.
I 100% agree. We're in an attention recession. Like, no, that's undeniable. And so people are just a lot more thoughtful about where and how they give away their resources, whether it be time or money or or attention, right? It's not willy-nilly anymore. You really have to earn it.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, that was great. Thank you so much, Megan. And just let's repeat the URL for the new project.
Yeah. So www.thenewNEUproject.com.
ThenewNEUproject.com.
Yep. That's
okay. Great. Check it out.
Please
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was great.
That was fun.